Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Erica Thomas, and I am the president-elect of RECAMFT. Thank you. And so I just want to introduce a few people to you, and then we'll get started. First of all, can I have the RECAMFT board members stand up, please? Thank you. So we have over here Bob Dazell, our past president, and Gail, our newsletter editor. Adam Smith is a director at large. I thought I saw some other board members around. In the back we have Laura Strom, our secretary. Thank you, guys. All right, and then we also have with us tonight Bob Casanova. Where are you, Bob? Bob Casanova is the president of CAMPT. Thank you for coming tonight, Bob. All right, so I'm going to introduce our speaker here to you tonight. We have Doreen Van Leeuwen, and we are so blessed to have her. Doreen specializes in critical incident debriefing. And first of all, I want to thank her for the way she has sprung into action to provide this training for us to help our community. And so Doreen, she has debriefed impacted employees in well over 100 incidents. Doreen is also on the board. She's a director at large for RECAMFT. And she has helped to try and facilitate a RECAMFT disaster response committee. But tonight is just all her. She saw the need and she came here to fill it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm so excited to be here. This is a great evening for us to be together. Hard circumstances for us to be together in, but good that we're here to do this together. I'm Doreen Van Leeuwen, and I'm a marriage and family therapist. Relocated to Santa Rosa just about 2 years ago so I could be closer to my 2 daughters and some grandchildren. So that's been super exciting and a really great supportive network for me, especially this week. Many of you may have discovered too how important family feels when we're going through something traumatic like this. I also want to say thank you because there are some people in this room without who I could not be up here. And of course, the first one I want to say is Laura Strom, because she has been my rock, my backbone in all of this, and it is her publicity and organizational skill that has allowed this also to come together. So truly, I think we're a team doing this together, as well as Gail, who has come to help set up the sound system, and of course, Joe has been all over trying to get everything working today, and I'm so grateful, Joe, for you making extra trips to the church and blah, blah, blah to get this all working. So Deborah and Joanne are at the registration station. So this is an amazing organization. Redwood Empire chapter of CAMPT is just a really hard-working, dedicated group of professionals who are making things happen. And tonight is another example of something that we're making happen. So I do feel pretty privileged to be standing here right now in this gorgeous sanctuary. And this is my church home, so it feels familiar to me, but it doesn't feel so familiar to be standing up here. And you know, I was really thankful to Pastor Jim when I asked him, and I said, you know, this is my idea, this is what I want to do, what do you think? And he's like, he didn't bat an eye, of course, you know, yes, do it. So I was very, very encouraging, and that he just said, welcome, come and do it, no charge, you know, just let's make this happen. And I think that also what sort of struck me is that God has sort of a wicked sense of humor, because I graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary in about 36 years ago with a master's in theology of all things. Now I ended up going into the marriage and family ministry direction, but, you know, never dreamed that I would be standing up in a pulpit. So here we are and doing that, right? So if you look up a minute, look up at the ceiling, you kind of notice it looks like a ship, right? The bottom of a ship. And interestingly enough, when this building was built, there were the people that actually helped build this were shipbuilders. And so it is intentionally built like a ship. And I thought, well, that's kind of a good thing because, you know, if we have flooding after all these fires, we'll have an ark. And so, all right, so maybe what we could do is, if you would be so kind as to humor me, is to stand up as your group is called, so we have a little better idea of who's in the room tonight. If you lost your home or a loved one or a business in this firestorm, would you stand up? Thank you. If you were evacuated, would you stand up? If you housed somebody, stay standing. If you housed somebody that was evacuated, whoever it was, okay. If you volunteered in any capacity, whatever it was that you did, anywhere. If you couldn't keep your paws off social media during this last 2 weeks. If you smelled fire. If you saw images on TV. Yeah. Is there anybody in this room that wasn't impacted by this? No. We're here for each other and for ourselves, just as much as we are here for those people that we love and want to help and those that we serve. So I want to honor that we are here for ourselves as much as we are for the others. And to bring ourselves to this time, I'm going to ring the bell, and we'll take about, maybe not quite a minute. And during that time, I'd like to invite you to remember that, you know, what we're doing is recovering. We are rebuilding. We are restoring. In some ways, we're reconciling tonight and in the days ahead. And as we sit here for a moment, that you could let out a sigh, an individual sigh, a groan, if you need to groan. And that you open yourself up more to be able to receive whatever it is that you are here to receive tonight. On the afternoon of Monday, April 5th, 1993, I was just wrapping up my day as a guidance counselor at North Shore Elementary School in Big Bear Lake. I was called to come to the phone in the office, and the female voice on the other end of the phone announced that there had been a fire at my cabin over the weekend, and that while the cabin was still standing, there had been severe smoke damage, and the place was not habitable. In a moment, my life turned upside down again. I had just completed 6 months at Dove's Home for Battered Women with 3 daughters, aged 1.5, 4, and 7, and I was graduating. I had found this little cabin, and I was just waiting for the power to be turned on. I had moved in all our earthly possessions, which weren't many, as we had fled, and we had not even lived there yet. Today was the day we were going to be moving in. So disasters often happen in layers. The girls and I were displaced to safe homes for 6 weeks while the cabin was restored. The owner, poor guy, was cited for retrofits that required extensive repairs and a prolonged evacuation. Several women from the shelter came and helped me scrub and wash every last bit of clothing and whatever we needed to do to get that place restored. So I think out of those experiences, what it is like to go through something like this. There's a Chinese character for crisis. You've probably heard this or seen this, that every crisis contains within it the seeds of recovery. Because not only is it danger, but there's an opportunity inside of that danger. And there's a book by Amanda Ripley, a very compelling book called The Unthinkable: Who Survives When Disaster Strikes? And she says that with a bit of effort, we can readily enhance the innate wiring that increase our chances not only of surviving, but recovering and being resilient in the aftermath of horrible circumstances. So tonight we're talking about the unique role of psychological first aid in disaster response. We all here, I imagine, are like me, and I guess I'll assume that you are like me to some extent here because we want to help heal and, as I mentioned, repair and recover and do something. And that, we want to make things better, that we want to make things right again. And there's this really crazy irony in all of this, in that what's going to count most in the days and weeks ahead is not what we do, but who we are. That what is needed now is being a caring presence. And that if there's anything I'm going to say tonight, if you take that with you and put that to work, then you will have gotten the essence of my words. That's it, in a nutshell. What you need to do at this point is really move into a compassionate place of being with people. Some of you probably are familiar with the idea of sitting Shiva when in the Jewish community somebody dies. And what happens is that for 7 days, the people who are mourning stay home, and friends, neighbors, family come, and they sit with the family, low to the ground preferably. And so the idea of what we're doing is we're sitting low to the ground with people, just being there. Sometimes it may be that you're going to be holding their hand or just being in the room quietly with them. Sometimes they're going to want to talk, and sometimes they won't. The objectives that I have for us tonight is to describe some of the reactions to a critical incident, and I hope that you all received a copy of the PowerPoint. It was emailed to everybody who registered, so you will have all this information. We'll talk about understanding psychological first aid. You picked up a handout on the way in. We're going to talk a little bit about how to work with children and youth. We're going to talk a little bit about fostering resiliency and recovery, and then what is not so helpful when you're trying to be doing a crisis intervention. So traumatic events cover a whole range of different incidents. Obviously, we've seen many of these things happen here in the United States in the last months. And I really don't, I don't need to reiterate it all, but I think the big piece that is so difficult about the fire is its suddenness, that it was unexpected. People were not prepared, or many of them were not prepared. And so that adds a whole layer of challenge and symptoms that people who have some chance of preparing, like for the floods, people could board up their house, they could leave, they could escape if they wanted to. It was more of a choice. In this situation, there was no choice. You just had to go. If it was, they came knocking on your door, it didn't matter what you were doing or what you were wearing. And I saw a lot of people, because I'm a Red Cross volunteer as well, at the shelter, who had left in their pajamas, and that's all they had, nothing more. They were lucky if they got their animals and their children out. One of the first things that you notice about people is a sense of shock, that there's this disbelief, this eeriness of, this didn't just happen, did it? It's like nobody can really wrap their heads around what's going on. It's beyond our mental and psychological and emotional faculties, our physical faculties at that moment cannot wrap our heads. It's like, what is happening is that poor hippocampus doesn't get a chance to do its work. And so we're just right on fight and flight. And that's part of why people are so distressed right now, is they haven't had the opportunity, or maybe they're just starting to get the opportunity for their brain to begin to process what it is that they've been through. A large part of the frustration is the uncertainty that people have been going through. They have felt anxious, like scared, as in, I don't know if my house is there. When do I get to go back? Why is it taking so long? What am I going to find when I get home? So there's that constant, and the first days, people were just, when are they going to tell us something? We want to know what's happening. And of course, it makes sense. I mean, our whole control has been taken away from us. But there is that sense of just, there's no way of knowing. There was no information that could be provided to give people any sense of reassurance. And there's still some that are struggling with that same feeling. So another piece of this layer is all the infrastructure that's been obliterated. So of course the roads are closed, the power is out. What else could go wrong? Our gas stations are closed. We can't get gasoline. The stores that we used to visit are gone, and it just feels like our whole life has been disrupted. For some of us more than for others, but everybody is feeling this at some level. And so that's part of what you're going to be helping people deal with, is that disruption and finding a kind of a new normal. How do I cope with what's happened and find a different, new way of getting through my life? Of course, we saw a lot of chaos, and here's a picture of a man laying on a mattress in the middle of the street. This wasn't actually a picture from Santa Rosa. It was a picture of the earthquakes in Italy earlier in 2017, but it could have been a picture of something around here, because when I was at the shelters this week, I saw lots and lots of people being transferred from the hospital, some of them coming to the shelters. Skilled nursing centers were emptied. Board and care homes, teenage living centers were emptied. So it was chaos. Where are we going to put all these people? And that too adds to the fear, because these people are even in a more dependent situation than many of us. They don't have transportation. They're really leaning on the outside for support. So let's talk a minute about, what is a disaster? So we've kind of been alluding to this, that it's a sudden, disturbing, or unusually challenging event or series of events that generate strong emotional and cognitive reactions, and that these challenging events have the potential for creating significant human distress and overwhelm our normal coping mechanisms. So when we have a sense that we're going to be able to manage what is in front of us, then we have a different response than when it just seems like it's totally beyond, we don't know what to do, we don't exactly know how we're going to get through this. Critical incident stress is also looked at as a state, and like an inner state of intensified arousal, where there's this cognitive, physical, emotional, behavioral, and spiritual reactions that result because we are exposed to the events. So you probably see a lot of signs on this list, some of which you may be seeing in some of your clients. Yes? No? Yes? Some people are nodding. Okay. In the early stages, this is a lot of what you see, that shock, the disbelief, the feeling helpless, loss of control, maybe panic, crying, feeling unsafe and vulnerable, vision problems. Who knew? And of course, then there could be the shallow, rapid breathing, the dizziness, stomach upset, clammy hands and feet, all the traditional signs of shock, medical shock, as well as the emotional and mental shock that people are going through. That stage starts to dissolve as people begin to apprehend a little bit about what's going on, and we move into the secondary stages where now we're having difficulty sleeping. How many people have had difficulty sleeping? Yeah, lots. All right, distressing dreams, maybe emotions that you're not normally an emotional person, but all of a sudden you find yourself being more irritable or more tearful, or just different feelings, grief, a lot of sadness. And for those, the closer that they are to the crisis, of course, the deeper their feelings of grief and loss. Confusion. I was trying to think about Monday evening and what happened earlier today. I kind of can't remember when did I wake up? How did I find out? I know that at some point I was packing stuff. I can't remember if it's in the night or if it was in the morning. I really don't remember. So that is a very common sign, and people sometimes beat themselves up for that, because then they think, I should remember, I should know what was happening, because then I could prevent it from happening again or do something better next time. If I could only remember what I did, then I could, fix that and change it. So, but I think that's part of what shock does, is remember that our brains are just going on overload, and it's not going through that hippocampus. It's not going into some place in the brain where it's being stored. We're just getting this crazy dump of all these hormones that interfere with what normally we do. So impaired judgment, memory, short-term problem-solving difficulties, you might have a hard time. I can remember standing in that bedroom, how many pairs of underwear shall I take? Who cares, really? Dumb things that I was just stressing on because I was sort of numb. I just didn't really know what I was doing, and I'm thinking, I've got to get my papers together. Who cares about the underwear? I've got to find where my account numbers are. And luckily, I have a little bit of a handle on that, but boy, am I going to fix that. I'm going to, I want to have a lot better handle on that. In fact, I was talking with my son-in-law, and I said, what we need to do is we need to come up with fanny packs that are all ready, and they are equipped with several flash drives. So what's going to happen is that you have your fanny pack, and you've got your flash drives in there, and maybe a few important things, the keys or whatever, and this hangs by the door, and so, in an emergency. Exactly. But let me tell you something. If you don't practice, and practice like picking up your fanny pack, like do a drill, I'll tell you what happened to this one fellow. He went to the garage, he got out his lantern from his camping box. He had a big plastic camping box, and he got a lantern out so that they could see around the house because the power went out. And he had to find the animals and the children and get everybody to the car. And they're driving it away, and he can't go back. And you know what? His go bag, it was sitting right next to that plastic box. Do you think he remembered to take it? No. So you can have your go bag ready, but if you don't practice and if you don't have a plan, it's iffy whether you're going to remember in the moment to take it or not. So there's another little tidbit. Disruption of work habits, of course. Yeah, I mean, how many of us have been not working in the last week or week and a half? And yeah, and some don't even know when they're going back to work yet, and some may not have a work to go back to. So yes, and then there's the headaches. And I mean, of course, the physical ones, but all the other headaches too. And we have, let's see, where are we? Changes in appetite, irritability, feeling inadequate. Anybody feel inadequate? Yeah, sure. Yeah. What was that?
I said we don't raise our hands very high. We ask
Right. Wanting to isolate? Or maybe the opposite, not wanting to be left alone. I know my daughter, youngest daughter, and her boyfriend were with me, and it was just really great that she slept in my bed with me. I mean, we were just cuddling, and it was just awesome to have that closeness there at night. It was kind of sad when she had to go, but well, they have a life, So, but the big one, huh? Guilt. Oh, that's such a crippling one, guilt. Oh, and it's so useless. It's really useless because why would we feel guilt? I mean, who planned this? Nobody, all right? But we feel it. We feel it bad because our house survived and theirs didn't, or we feel bad that we didn't remember to do something, or that we aren't prepared and weren't prepared and we lost stuff. I mean, guilt, and then, of course, it's not very distant cousin shame. Ooh, yeah, that comes right on the heels of guilt. And so then we're, worrying and carrying this monkey on our back. And so I really invite you tonight that as you leave here, this is a great place to leave guilt. It really is. This is just a really great place to leave it. And as you walk out the doors, you can just leave it and let it go and decide that you did the best you knew to do in the moment that you could. And you're going to tell your clients that very same self thing, that they did the best they could in that moment, and that you then have the opportunity to think about, what would I do differently? And I can act on those things. And doing that, acting on the things that we want to do differently, actually repairs some of that sense of loss of control, those feelings of being inadequate, and it begins to dissolve that guilt. When every action you take, when you start scanning in your documents, or you call your family together to come, figure out a preparation plan, or whatever layer it is that you're going to do to take care of yourself in this, is going to help you feel more confident and strong and more capable. So there's a ton of resources to help with that too. So just look out for my next workshop on getting prepared. How's that? All right. So let's see. We are at Remembering. Hi, thank you for joining us tonight.
I've been lost.
Oh, yay! We're so glad you're here. Perfect timing. Remembering and reliving prior traumas. That's a tough one that we cannot help. It's that the feelings that we come up with in the moment now are similar to the feelings and thoughts we've had in the past, and all of that stuff comes back up again. It makes it so much more difficult to bear what we're going through now, because we're having to sort of re-grieve, re-experience those painful times in our past. Like, when I was thinking about fire and thinking about the fire that came to me in 1993, that those are difficult things that happen to us that we have no control over. The brain is just doing this because it's trying to make sense of what has happened. And so, like the flashbacks and the thinking over and over, obsessing about it, is the brain really trying to work this through again and again and again to come to some place of understanding, because we want to understand so that we can figure out a way to survive. Our brains are really all about survival. That's what the human species is about. And so all of these symptoms are really part of that process. Not very nice, though. They're really kind of irritating. Some of the ones you want to watch for with your clients, of course, are things like increased use of alcohol, marijuana, illegal, and prescription drugs. That's very tempting in this situation to alleviate what people are feeling, obviously. They may also see a spike in their arguing with each other, or normally not very volatile people suddenly become kind of volatile and start arguing. My neighbor across the street, I walked over there and we were talking, and her parents lost their place and they have been staying with her. And she said, "Oh my God, they're just arguing like crazy. It's just terrible. I mean, they were talking divorce." And she's like, "What is going on?" And so it was kind of scary for her that her parents were really, not handling this very well, and they're in their mid-70s. So how rough for them to be having to go through that again. Some other signs would be gallows humor, make kind of dark humor, but it's a way of lightening up the load. Sometimes we might be, some people get a little offended by that because it's like, you shouldn't be talking like that. That's not funny in this situation. But that's really, everybody kind of goes through this differently. And one of the big pieces here is remembering that there's no two people alike. There's no two people with backgrounds that are similar. So they're going to go through these experiences and these feelings differently. And that your job, remember, is you're sitting with them and you're honoring that this is the way they are going through this process. And it's not wrong or right. It's what is going on, and you're going to help steer them in the directions that are most helpful for them. But to some extent, it is what it is. Other things that you're going to see perhaps with people that you want to look out for is if, there's an excessive use of sick leave. Naturally, the people that are more impacted may have a higher sense of illness, or I'm sorry, didn't say that right. Their immune systems are compromised. And so I'm a little worried about the flu season coming up. So I think it behooves us all to take very good care of ourselves, because we are all under some extra duress. So be good to yourself, get enough rest, and take care of yourself. Do the things that you're going to tell your clients to do so that you continue to be really present for them. Religious confusion. Wow. Yeah. Like, why would God allow this to happen? Or why would God do this? Or, all that stuff comes up. And then that there's the anniversary setbacks. I know you know that, but it's a good reminder that, a year from now or other things are going to happen that are going to bring, this back to the surface again. And then maybe trauma. For some people, a sign would be depression. I don't think that people being blue at this moment in time, I don't think that that's really depression. Those are symptoms of what we've been through. If it continues and lasts more than a month or a month and a half, then I would say maybe we're moving more into the direction of clinical depression. But we have to be really careful about that, not pathologizing. And then loss of sexual interest, that's the one that, gosh, it's the worst, right? Common reactions in children. Some of you are working with children in here? Yeah? Okay. All right. Have some of the children or the parents been talking about these symptoms where the kids are regressing, they are having trouble going to sleep, they're just clinging to mommy or daddy. They definitely, I've heard people say they don't want their mom or dad to go to work. They don't want them to leave. They may be more agitated. Of course, the more agitated the parent is, likely that's going to transfer over to the child too. And then, persistent fears related to the catastrophe. Oh, how did she sneak in there? That's my little granddaughter. But that's a while ago. She's not stressed, by the way. Can you tell? So, jumpiness, startling easily, physical complaints, not wanting to go to school, misbehaving at school, and withdrawing, feeling listless. All these symptoms are pretty normal things that kids do when they're not in a good place. Of course, increased arguing with their siblings, which drives mom and dad crazy. Mom and dad are already overwhelmed with everything that's going on, and so it's tough. All right. Come back here. So, what's so crucial here is that we don't pathologize. All of these symptoms are not necessarily indicating that these people have a DSM-5 condition, okay? These are such normal, common, universal responses to what people go through. And many of these people, what they're going to find is that these symptoms are going to begin to lessen rather quickly. Within 4 to 6 weeks, most people that, the ones that are the least impacted are going to notice that things are feeling pretty okay, that we're all right, and we're not having all these symptoms anymore. Most families will recover over time. But of course, you and I know that the people the deeper the impact on them, the harder and the longer that recovery is going to be. And again, that we be careful that we don't pathologize what they're going to be experiencing, because they're going to be angry and they're going to be frustrated. And what we typically see is in the early period of events like this is that the community comes together and there's a tremendous amount of goodwill, and so everybody's like, wow, this is everybody's donating stuff and it's great, and man, we have such a good community, and we're really going to pull through this. This is we're on a high. And unfortunately, that tends to begin to taper probably about 2 weeks. And then what we see is this very precipitous crash going down, 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 especially for the people that are most severely impacted. And that is where our work is, in the trenches, because These people are going to be dealing with FEMA and their banks and their insurance companies, and they're trying to get permits from the city. And guess what? How many other people are also trying to do the same thing at the same time? And then they're going to discover that maybe their insurance doesn't cover everything that they lost. Or perhaps they find out that FEMA isn't covering or isn't going to give them this much money that they had expected, or, there's just a lot of things that are not going to go right, or that are going to be frustratingly slow. And naturally, people are going to get impatient and rage. They're like, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? Why aren't the bureaucracies stepping in to do something? Our government is all blah blah. Okay, we're going to get a lot more of that. So we have to really expand inside to make room for all that rage that's coming down the pike. I'd like to be wrong. I really would like to be wrong about that. But that's not what we learn when we're studying about the disaster recovery and what happens. And so it's really being there for people during this down cycle and then getting them to, that level place. Now, again, I want to reiterate, most families are going to recover, and so that's a good thing. And that there are going to be some that it's going to be harder for, and we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what it's going to look like, but it's going to be different. Yeah, it's new normal is what our mayor was talking about, all right? And it's true, it's a new place we're moving to, uncharted for this community. There's a lot of hope in that story. And as long as we continue to be hopeful ourselves, we can be there to kind of shine that light for others. Because some of them are going to feel really, really hopeless. And sometimes I've thought about that there are times where we become hope for other people. They don't have it, but we become the hope. And we carry that hope for them while they're in their period where they don't have any hope. But we stay with them, and we don't give up on them, so that they can come to that place where they can rediscover that hope themselves. And I know, because I've been there, and people held hope for me. And I can stand here today and tell you about that. And that's awesome, because there were others, communities that have surrounded me, people that have guided me, wisdom that has protected me. And so, yes. Okay. Risk versus resilience factors. That's sort of an important concept. That there are things that are going to make people more vulnerable to surviving this and thriving. And then there are obviously things that exacerbate the conditions that they're going through. And there is a list. And I'm not going to read it to you because you're going to get that PowerPoint. And I apologize that you didn't already get it. It's been a challenge just getting all this together on such short order. And part of it was me working on this till the very last minute to get it all together and get it out to you. So, but you will get it. And if for some reason you don't, just keep bugging us, all right? We'll get it to you. If you'll notice on the second column, almost towards the bottom, what do you see? Aha. All right. So preparedness and practice helps people in their resilience, because what happens is, in the moment when something bad happens, they don't have to stop and think about what they're going to do. And very often in those early moments, there's a kind of a paralysis that sets in, that we just cannot really quite think. And people will stop and stand and debate about things, like a kind of a deer in the headlights syndrome. And all the while, precious seconds are being lost. And this was something that they looked at in people that went through the Twin Towers debacle in 2001, was that there were people who had practiced in those situations, and they were ready, and they filed down the steps, and they were orderly, and they looked for other people, and they got them. And then there were others that were just chaotic, and they didn't want to leave their office. They didn't want to, they thought they forgot something. They went back. And so what they did is they actually complicated the recovery process, because they were not responding, they were not leaving, they were making it harder for the first responders who were trying to get them out of the buildings, and they had to go and search for them. So it's really, really critical, as you're thinking about this, that you also think about this in terms of a future planning of, as you're equipping yourself, you're equipping your clients also to be better equipped, be more ready in something in the future. And I don't want to, beat a dead horse there, but I just want to beat that dead horse a little longer. So there's another interesting one on here that I thought was kind of funny, is gender makes us more resilient. That it tends to be that women tend to recover a little bit more easily, and that seems to have something to do with the larger hippocampus, and probably the fact that the brain, the two halves communicate more, and so that's just interesting. I'll stop there. So you can see here that there's many different things that do contribute towards, and that as you're working with your clients, you can also kind of do sort of your little assessment on the back, like what kind of resilience and risk factors is this person going through, and gently inquiring and drawing that information out. It's not like you have to tell them per se, but a lot of it is, gentle inquiry and bringing these things forward. What do you think? I thought that was very good. All right, so this is a very dry, boring sawdust slide about disaster mental health core competencies. All right, so understanding and describing terms and concepts, and we're working on that. But of course, it is important that we do communicate effectively, and that's part of why we define these things, and that what you're doing is you're assessing to decide if there is a need for an intervention, because sometimes all you need to do is let people spill and be there and listen, and that's the intervention, and it's good. You don't have to do any more. In fact, the more we do, the more in a way we're taking away from their self-efficacy. So think about agency, and as self-efficacy and adequacy. We didn't feel so adequate. I saw a lot of hands going up. All right, so all our people are going to be not feeling so adequate. So what we're doing is we're helping them to know they are adequate and that they're enough, but we sort of coming in and figuring out how much support do they need, and what are they really very competent and capable of doing on their own. And you're going to be surprised that a lot of them are really quite competent, and it's great. So, and then of course, I think it's really important that we do demonstrate that we can take care of ourselves and each other. And I'm so glad you're here tonight, because to me that says you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and we're a community, and we're then serving a much larger community. But this is so important, what we're doing. Okay, so there's sort of three key foci of disaster mental health, and that is that it's a short-term helping process. And it's an acute set of interventions. And as I said, sometimes the intervention is that you sit with people and just listen. And it's the idea, the goal is to mitigate people's reaction, that it's considered emotional first aid instead of psychotherapy. Now, I'm sorry, these next slides. Okay, so there's these three kind of core pieces here. Okay, it's a short term, and it's acute, and it's like a first aid, emotional first aid, right? Well, just think of yourself as a big bandage. All right. The purpose is that what we're trying to do is help people's reaction diminish as quickly as possible so that they can cope and plan, and that what we're doing is we're assisting them to figure out what kind of supports they need, and that we're really letting them know that a lot of what they're experiencing is normal and common and universal. And then we're helping to assess what they're capable of doing. And if they need referral, then we're equipping, we're trying to gather the information or send them to the places where they can get that information. So you know that the Santa Rosa City has a website, and there is lots and lots of wonderful information there, so you can refer people to that. And on our Redwood Empire RECAMFT homepage, you will also find lots of information, handouts, lots and lots of different tools that are there for you. So please check that out, and more will be coming. We're going to be posting this video there. The PowerPoint slides will be there. So we really want to make sure that there's lots of information. And then the goals of this disaster mental health is really stabilizing people, reducing symptoms, increasing their resiliency, facilitating them returning to a normal and adaptive functioning, and facilitating access to continued care if they need it. There's a little comparison slide talking about the difference between intervention and psychotherapy. So when we're working with people in crisis care, we're really actually reinforcing their defenses. We're not trying to get them to look at the past. We don't want them to relive all those traumas from the past. It's more about referring them to, the things that they need, rather than us going into treatment. Now that, it kind of depends. I mean, if these are your clients that you normally work with, and they're already in treatment with you, obviously it's a little different. But remember that you might see suddenly a spike in their symptoms that is unusual for them, and that, okay, what's going on is they've just been through a tragedy, is likely going to subside, especially with your guidance and help. And the facilitator in this instance is pretty active and direct, and so that's pretty useful. So I think of disaster mental health as like, it's on a, mental health is like this big continuum. And so disaster mental health is kind of over here on one end of the continuum, where we're really working with normal people that are having normal symptoms to abnormal situations. And sometimes we might find that they then progress on that continuum into deeper layers of treatment necessary, but many of them won't. So we just kind of move them right back out into the world where they can function and do their thing. So what are some of the essential intervention skills? And that's partly what's on your paper there too, is I'm just going to bump to the next slide because these two are kind of duplicates. So one is, make a connection. All right, so if some of these people, if you're doing volunteer work, you're going up to them and, how do you start that conversation? And I think it's just coming alongside of them and what's your experience in the shelter here? What's it been like for you? Or how are you doing since you've been? How long have you been here? Where were you when you found out about this? So you just ask some questions that lead in. Some of them are going to want to talk about this. Some of them may not. Not about feeling badly when that happens. It's just noticing it, like being aware and okay with that's, yeah, I'm symptomatic too. And it's normal and it's going to pass. And oh yeah, I'm here for my clients. So let me put that over here for now. And I'll come back to that in a little bit so I can be present for my clients. So I love this idea that I have a shelf, and I can put my stuff on the shelf. Doesn't mean it's gone. I don't have to repress it. And I don't have to feel guilty that that's happening. But I can just put it over here and then tend to it later. And so I think that helps. I find that these conversations can be pretty draining for me, and that one of the things that I like to do is take a little break between them, do a few deep breaths. When I'm at my office, I might go to the restroom, just get out of the office even for a moment. But otherwise, just consciously let that conversation go. Imagine that, Mother Earth is there, I'm grounded, and I'm letting that conversation drain right in, out of me, and don't have to absorb it. Another idea is that we're sponges. We can soak up this stuff, but we have to be kind of careful because we don't have to take all that stuff in. It doesn't mean that we're better people if we're feeling bad for them. It's more like maybe having sort of a detached openness, like we're there, we're present, but I don't have to soak it all up. And that if I am soaking it up, because sometimes I do, I'm a sponge, and then I just squeeze it out. Okay, just get rid of it, let it go. Joan Borisenko, I used to listen to, I had some tapes of hers, and she talked about the golden circle. Do you remember that? The kindness, I can't remember, it was a meditation, a kindness and compassion meditation, but she talked about the golden circle around us, and that golden circle only allows in what is good, and it only allows out what is good. And I love that whatever else goes through the golden circle and it dissolves. And so imagining, and you do that for yourself, that you imagine as you're going into work or going to volunteer, that you're equipping yourself with your golden circle and taking that, being mindful that to take care of yourself, you don't have to take all of that with you and absorb it into yourself. And we can park that. That means when you're doing that, you can actually be there to help people, because you are more present and open, and you know that if we're full, we're not much good. And it's important that you are able to give realistic reassurance. And that's tough, because we want to make people feel better, and yet there's a lot of things that we don't want to promise because we don't know if that's true. So you give what you can honestly say and be genuine. You give your most authentic, genuine self. And we're going to have questions, and somebody's going to run around with a microphone, and absolutely. So can you hold that for just a few minutes? All right. You're going to encourage their good coping skills. And obviously you're helping people connect with each other, especially in shelter, volunteer type of situations. That's not quite the same when you're working with your clients. And again, it's about knowing how to end that conversation, that if you see that the person has finished talking or there's no more coming, you can say, is there anything else you'd like to say about that? Or is there anything else I can do for you? And then if there's no, then great. Let's take some questions. This is a good time for questions. Okay. And Bob is going to run around with the microphone. Look at him run. Wow.
Hi there, my name is Paul Margolis. I have a question about realistic reassurance. So a lot of my clients use Vista, which is no longer accessible. And to get meds, which they no longer have, they've been told to go to various other places, and if they're lucky, they can get meds. So I guess I'm just throwing that out. When people are at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, I'm not sure what realistic is. I certainly couldn't say to somebody, don't worry about it, you'll get meds within a few weeks. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but just where do we go with realistic reassurance?
Yeah, that's so hard because you don't know. And we're back to that uncertainty that we don't know. And you can't tell them. And you know that they need their meds. And they know that they need their meds even more than you know that they need their meds. And you don't know when they're going to get their medication. And I suppose the realistic reassurance is to say, I'm going through this process with you while you're waiting to get your medication. This is really frustrating and scary. And I imagine you feel pretty anxious that you don't have your medication and that you don't know when you're going to get your medication. And while I would love to tell you that I know that you are going to get your medication, that wouldn't be really honest. And I honor you and respect you too much to tell you a false promise like that. I'm going to be real and say, let's keep exploring and knocking on doors till you can get what you need. But it's going to be, it may be longer than you want, and certainly longer than you need. Does that make sense?
I can live with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will help, but Brookwood Clinic is also under the Vista Clinic umbrella, and not that it would be easier, they'll get their medications in a snap, but that's just one suggestion. Also that they may want to go up to PES, over I guess on Corporate Parkway now, and that could also be a way of getting medication if someone is no longer able to use Vista because they're not there.
Hello, I'm Joellen Christensen, and I'm part of a really great listserv of bilingual psychotherapists in Sonoma County that your future president is also a part of. And I was kind of running around various shelters this past weekend for a few days, kind of in the juncture where locals were still providing support and the Red Cross was coming in, and that don't give unrealistic reassurance was painfully present for me all the time. Because although the sheriff said, oh, ICE is not going to come, I could not tell people that for sure. So I had to just be with it, like, I didn't even say that the sheriff promised that they wouldn't come. And I finally checked in with a very reliable clergyman I know in Petaluma who's actually sheltering some people. And he told me the exact quote was, ICE promised not to get search warrants, because they do need search warrants to enter shelters, while the fires were burning. So as the fires got more and more contained, we noticed more and more Latino families leaving the shelters. So
Thank you for that. That is another whole layer, isn't it?
I'm wondering if you could speak to when would it be appropriate to return to sort of your normal treatment plan with a client. So for many of us that have caseloads and we have clients that have experienced this trauma, is there any sort of literature or research around when it's best to sort of go back to the interventions and the strategies and the tools that you've been working with your clients previously on?
Oh, I don't know about the literature or whether there's actually some documented studies that would tell this is how long you should wait, or if there is some things that you would look for. But let's brainstorm. I've got a room full of very talented people here. What do you think would be some signs that people were ready to get back to work on normal interventions?
I think that when they lead into other issues and or if I know you're avoiding an issue right now, and I've seen that avoidance before, so it's like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. But I think most of us really are going to know that if I'm pushing too hard, too fast, they're going to freeze. They're going to not be there.
Right. What else? Anybody else have a thought on that? There's a hand up in the back. Oh, Jen.
I'd say also that it comes and goes. I mean, it's going to go like, okay, let's talk about this relationship issue, and then suddenly you're noticing that, well, so how are you about the fires or what happened? And then it keeps coming, it's going to coming back, and then obviously everybody watch next year, next fall. There's going to be a lot of like, why am I feeling so scared and why can't I sleep? So it's coming and going.
Here. What I'm noticing in my practice is that the issues and patterns that were already there in my clients are way heightened. So things that we've been working on ongoing are just really up in their face. So it almost feels like, I don't know, it's hard for me to even distinguish between like the work I was doing before and the work I'm doing now, because it just feels like, again, like you said, Bob, I appreciated meeting them where they're at. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's also possible, of course it depends on the level of functioning of your clients. I understand that some are much more able to verbalize and process things, and other people are going to be in a much more degraded situation. Some will have decompensated. But I do think that with those that you trust that you can have that conversation, you could say, do you want me to listen more about what's been going on for you with all of this? I'm happy to continue to let you talk about this more, or we can process it more. Or do you feel as though I have, heard this and that you feel understood and that you're ready to move on to some other things? And so you're letting them sort of take the reins, and that's a good thing. And because really it's empowering them to take responsibility for what they're doing in the therapeutic hour. And I think many of them will respond and say, I think I'm not ready to move on. I need to talk about this some more. Okay, then that's what we'll do. And then you can come back and circle back with that question, maybe, the same session later or a next session, and that's good. That's fine. Let them kind of lead you if they can. Does that help? Good. Let's see. All right. So here are some things that are going to be in your PowerPoint, so you don't have to take notes on all this, but there's something called the C3 assessment, and what you're doing in the moment with people is you're looking at their speech, What kind level of is their emotion? How do they look to you? What kind of appearance? What's the level of their alertness and the amount of activity? And these are things that you do, you breathe, you know, I'm not telling you anything new here, but you're doing it more. So you're letting them give you that information about what's happening. This is what the wrong button. 3 R's is what Red Cross suggests, and that would be that you're looking at the reactions. This SAFER method, I like the acronyms. I mean, they're kind of fun. That we talked about that a little earlier, you know, stabilizing. You're acknowledging, you're validating for them what they're experiencing. Facilitating, encouraging, and restoring or referring. And a little tool that you can teach your clients that's real valuable, many of you know this as well, but it's some form of a relaxing breath. This is one form of it. There are many, many different forms, but this one particularly is one we're going to practice right now. Okay? So you're going to close your mouth if you can. And breathe in through your nose to a count of 4. And then you hold your breath for a count of 7. And then exhale through your mouth, making a whoosh sound to a count of 8. And let's do it 2 more times. So breathe in for 4. Hold for 7. And whoosh for 8. One more. Feel good? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another one that's real helpful, I did this with a client the other day. She came in, was very distressed, and you know, before, sometimes it feels like you've got, you know, you've been doing surgery and this person's all open on your table and you're like, oh my God, I got somebody else coming in. What am I going to do? But this one is attention refocusing. So you ask them to pay attention to what's going on in the room right now. You get them to focus on being, I keep talking like that's the microphone and it's really here. So you're going to look around and see, there's that arc. Yeah, okay. And then what sounds are you hearing? And so you ask them to pay attention to what's coming in through the ears. Have them notice if there's any scents or fragrances that they can detect. I then bring their attention to, what can they feel the clothing on their body? Can they feel the texture or just the presence, the weight? Maybe they're sitting down. I can tell right now my right toe hurts because it's pushing against the front of my foot, my boot. So what was the last sense that I missed? I missed one. Taste, of course, duh. So you bring them right back into their senses. Very powerful. Really often helps people to get right out of that emotional distress and come into the moment. So, a good one. All right. And then there's always yeah, and joking with your clients is good. Bob is my mentor and hero. He's such a good one with humor. I appreciate that about you. So we're going to be fostering resilience and recovery, and again, I a slide with lots of words on it, blech. But self-care, okay, yeah, self-care. Comforting people and comforting surroundings. Sharing thoughts with feelings with supportive people is really important. Accepting the past, that the reactions to the past events are resurfacing, and just like, we talked about how that prior trauma comes up, and being in an accepting place for that. Realizing that those unpleasant feelings are going to diminish, and you're communicating that over and over. And encouraging them not to take responsibility for how other people are reacting to the event, that they don't have to feel, take that in or get upset about that. And communicating needs clearly is huge. Holiday, anniversary, and then if symptoms worsen, that you encourage them to make sure that they look for help. I do, like Erica mentioned, I do lots and lots of EAP on-site stuff. And I usually have a handout, and on the bottom is the number for the EAP. And so, people are not going to really be very happy if I say to them, I really think you should call that EAP number, because it makes them feel a little defensive. But what I do it's so that I can, say, hey, there's an EAP number there. And one of the things that you can do as being part of this work community is, you know your colleagues and your coworkers, so kind of look out for each other. And if you notice that somebody's having a hard time, you might mention to them about that EAP and that they've got 3 free sessions, and they can call someone, and it's all confidential and nobody's going to know. And what have I just done? All right? So they're going to hear that little seed. But they're not thinking it's about them, they're there to look out for the other person, but they just got all the information. And so I've found that, a real nice little way to slide that information into people's awareness. And it depends, of course, when you're dealing with professionals, they're really more readily, going to receive that information and be okay with it. But there's a lot of times that I'm with, people that are in the vineyards or, working in, a factory, that the last thing on earth that they're going to want to do is go see a therapist. But still, it's a very important and useful information for them to have. So that's a kind of a nice little way to bring that in. So what's not helpful? Oh, I'm gonna ask you. Tell me, what do you think is not helpful? Saying that you know what they're going through. I'll mirror it. Yes. There's a hand back there. Overloading with resources. Mm-hmm. What else? You can cheat. You can look at the handout.
Taking up more space than the client.
Yeah. Yes. Oh dear, I had a therapist that was in my office, worked in the next office. It was really hard because I would just hear his voice the whole hour after hour after hour, and I'm thinking, oh grief.
Platitudes.
Yeah. That's really hard. Those are destructive. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Not listening enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And remember, there's that tendency to want to help and fix. And that part of us is ever present. And so we get to really manage that part of us, that especially in these situations, we can be real mindful about parking that part of us. And again, gently, be careful about how much you want to help. Let people take as much responsibility as they can. Hold a second. Bob's coming with a microphone. Good question.
Hi, I'm Tricia Ellis Christensen.
Hi, Tricia.
And my question is, because when you're doing this emergency response thing, you're moving at a quicker pace, and it would seem like it would be easy to sort of to get caught up in wanting the client to quickly move on to their lives, you know, and so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about when you apprehend the need for additional resources and how you transition that client to them. I know you spoke about the EAP, but within this emergency setting where you might be working in a shelter or something like that, and just having 1 or 2 contacts with a client at most, how do you sort of move them along if you see that need is there, and how do you let go of your own ego that you know you want that client to be well once you've spoken with them?
Oh, yeah.
I know that's a big question, but
Yeah. Right. And of course, maybe a shelter, an emergency shelter, and you see that they are not handling it well, maybe they're crying nonstop or being other people. And with Red Cross, what happens is that we'll first of all, we'll find someone like us and get that person hooked up with, DMH, disaster mental health, and we'll bring that person off to the side where they're away from all the other persons, because of course those feelings and behaviors can contaminate what other people are experiencing. So we're going to kind of want to quarantine that. And then that's where you're beginning to do your assessment of what, how, where, when is going on with this person. Are they, lucid? You're doing your little mental status exam, sorry. Yes, right, exactly that. And if you notice that they really are going to be a danger to themselves, danger to others, whatever, then you contact the appropriate authorities. Sometimes you can pull in somebody from the medical side that are present, and they can help with that. Other times it may be that you actually have to contact the police or first responders, and they have to bring that person to a more secluded environment. Sometimes it's that you've got people that don't do well in big crowds. And so, well, what the heck, this is a huge crowd of people and they need to be off by themselves. So maybe there's a way to create a little space for them. And sometimes even, putting them, in a tent outside if the weather is okay with that, that there's ways, contacting family members to come and get them if that's possible. So you're really looking, how can we meet the most pressing needs? Sometimes it might be that they need to be closer to the bathroom, or they need to be closer to, like they can't get around very easily, and so that's agitating them. And then you get people that have some dementia and they can't find their cot, and so you've got to help them find a way to know where their cot is so that they can get back to it, because of course in this situation they're really, the dementia is a little bit worse. Am I making any sense here? Is that somewhat helpful?
I was thinking more along the lines of somebody who's maybe having an acute stress reaction. And I'm sorry to bring the DSM in after you asked us to throw it out, but I'm going to anyway. Because, you see someone where, where their stress level is just so high, they may not be a risk to themselves or others at that time, but they clearly need more than you can give them in that setting. And so I guess my question was more about how you let go of your ego and make sure you're not just saying, oh, this is just a normal response. and you do say, I have to consider that this is not a normal response, that this is in fact something a little more, and I need to make sure that my handoff here includes handing off to another resource, like a therapist for long term or something like that. And that's more what I was, I think, questioning.
Yeah. And I kind of see the answer is tucked inside your question, really.
Yeah.
It is about being okay with the fact that this person doesn't appear to be coping. And I think most of us in this room have been around and long enough to recognize when somebody's in acute distress and they need more help than what they're getting in that situation. Sometimes you're able to talk them off the ledge, you know, in the moment, you're just being with them and you're able to help them. And of course, getting somebody who's bilingual or speaks their language is huge. If you can do that, that could be an issue. And really, I think in the moment, listening carefully, like what is it that is triggering this person so much in this situation right now? Like what is going on here in this present circumstance that's adding to them being so upset right now? And then and it may be that you need to get them out of the situation and do that.
I saw an example of this in a shelter. I wasn't there as much, but there was another local therapist who was almost there every day. And there was a particular family with great need because the dad was a meth user and there was a 7-year-old boy and a baby. And so what happened eventually, she was really supporting that family, but she discovered he had a knife, so she had to call the police, and the police came and took away his knife. But they let him stay, right? And then I was like the third CPS report on the little boy, but there's a different situation. I mean, the CPS consult I did, they said, well, you know, are there other adults around right now? We can't come to that kid. So everything is very different than what we typically think of. But the other thing I'm thinking about, in the case of drug users, there were a lot of amazing nurses and paramedics around who really knew their stuff, and they realized some people were having reactions because they were not on their usual substance, and they were trying to help out in their medical way with that.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. I'm Jeannie LeMessurier. You've been addressing the needs of normal people in the times of crisis. Now that the crisis is not behind us, but it's subsiding, we're going to have most likely an influx of first responders. Could you please address how do we take care of a population where they may have the message to be that much stronger than the average person? So if you could address that. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So, yes, I think that the first responders, many of them have a level of exposure that's way beyond what most of us have, and I think their needs are different, and that's where my guess is when those people start coming in, there's going to be some very careful assessing about are there symptoms of the acute stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. Many of them are going to be having those kinds of ongoing longer. And so then it becomes a matter of looking at your interventions. What are the most appropriate interventions? I am not actually, I don't work much with police and firefighters and EMTs. That's not been my area of strength. So I'm not even going to try to say too much more about that because I feel like I'm getting outside of the scope of what, the range of what I've really dealt with.
Actually, I could address that for you. There's a group out there called the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. Their website is wcpr2001.org. And it's run by volunteers, peer support personnel for the fire department and police departments. And on their list of resources is clinicians that are extremely familiar with the first responder community. So if you have first responders, you can refer them to them, and they'll list there's clinicians all throughout the Bay Area that work with this group to help with the first responders. Yeah, it's called the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. It's a 6-day residential treatment program for first responders to have PTSD, but also there's a list of clinicians on their website under the resource page that's familiar with the first responder community and their culture. It's a, if you just think it's a WCPR2001.org. And they're also, the umbrella organization is called the First Responder Support Network, FRSN.
Thank you for that.
Laura, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we've been signing up, therapists have been signing up on our website for offering 3 to 5 or more free sessions for people who need more therapy after. So there's that too. You can sign up on our website, RECAMFT.org, to offer 3 to 5 or more free sessions for victims of this incident. Okay?
Are there more? There's another question or comment.
Hi, it's a comment. I belong to a group called the New Horizons Band. It's for geezers like me who play music. And I was there on Tuesday. It was the first time we were able to meet. And one of the people came up to me, and she had had the fire within about 2 blocks of her, and she was still pretty shook up. And she was asking me whether, if she was okay or not, really. And it occurred to me, so I got up in front of the group, and really all I said to them was, look, this is going to take weeks, and everybody's going to be affected. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me afterwards and thanked me. And so people just need some kind of reassurance that what they're going through is normal.
Yep. Thank you for that. There's a bunch of hands.
Hi, my name is Katie Fleck, and I have a lot of friends that are elementary school, junior high, or high school teachers. And amongst that population, there's a lot of anxiety about students hitting that stage 2, stage 3, and beyond in terms of like acute stress response. And I know that there's programs like School Box and things like that, but just in terms of resources for people who have the most immediate daily impact and observation on students, like what resources do you recommend for people who are not clinical in nature, but reality is they're going to be doing referring to school counselors?
Help. Bob, there's some hands going up here. I think that people that want to give some.
Sonoma County Office of Education actually is going around to schools right now and providing trainings. They also, there's a lot of different organizations that are helping out in schools. SAY is one of them. So we have clinicians that are actually in the schools that are helping out. I know SCO is also offering, I think, to support with any schools that don't have clinicians right now that are assisting school counselors.
And somebody else has a hand up here.
I just wanted to say that I was in a shelter the other day, and critical thing for the individual that was asking for some assistance was for the person to not be touched, and the individual did, and actually did a lot. And so just a little reminder that please ask first.
Thank you for that. I know I'm such a touchy-feely person, and I have to be really careful about that I can't assume that other people want that.
This may be a silly question, but I'm finding that I'm trying to discern what the line is between letting people vent and talk about their experience, especially people who've lost their homes, and not wanting to be involved with any kind of re-traumatization. So can you speak on that? Just how to sort of know what the line is for people wanting to talk about their experience, but also not wanting to push too much to have them leave in worse shape than they were in when they came into my office. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think of it like perhaps it's like a flower that they come in and you're allowing them to, open, but that as you are, you're still in charge of that time and that space and that session and guiding that so that you're helping that to close up again. That, your focus is on providing them with things to think about, like, have you mentioned that you've gone through something like this before. What helped you get through that then? Were there some people that really stood out to you? Or tell me one thing that you did during that time that made a difference for you to move forward on that. What did you learn from that experience? Can you tell me, what were some of the strengths that you took out of that? And, what did you notice about yourself after you came out of that? What was different for you? So you're moving that session. I mean, I know, I see your hand. I recognize you. I acknowledge that you're there, and I'll get your microphone to you. But that it's important for you that you do have a limit of time, then you do need to move that along and you let them talk. You're empathizing and letting them know that you really understand, and then you're guiding that into the resilience. Is so important.
I think this is really important. What you can do is ask people what they're experiencing while they're talking and get them into that experience so that they're back in here and now and into their body and not simply obsessing on the visions of what they did, and slow them down and to be able to get them back in the room.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes.
One of the things I found useful this week is having them talk as though it was like a movie.
Yes.
And then also I keep interjecting. It's like, okay, so 10 days ago this happened, because I'll notice when somebody starts dropping into the present tense, like, I'm in the line and the cars I'm trying to evacuate, and if they're in the present tense, and I just remind them, you're telling me about something, we're in this office. And one person even described it as a movie. They said, okay, this is what happened to this person. They named themselves, gave themselves a name from the movie, and then described this whole thing as though they watched it. Mm-hmm. And then I also just wanted to, been thinking about the comment about working with the policemen and firefighters, because I have that background, and it's, I'm not an expert, but I think it's so important to just really be equal with them, and that there's a lot of concern about not getting pathologized or not, so it's just like I talk about, these are tools, you have tools, I have tools, and anything that you have that can relate, because I used to work with the correctional facility, and so that helps to just feel like, okay, because sometimes especially police can feel like they're on the other side sometimes of the public. And so just to make it really like you've got a job and I can help you with some tools here, and using EMDR, EFT can help so much. And just make it like, yeah, this helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like what that the tone of voice is just very natural, very calm, like very matter of fact, and that helps them to absorb and accept that they've got tools, but you've got tools, and you're sharing those with them to help. That's great. Cool. Thank you. Okay, let's see. We're wrapping up, and there may be a few more questions. Let's move towards the end because it's almost 9 o'clock. So let's see. We are talking about team support. And you may be in a situation where you have the blessing of a team, and that's great. And so I'm encouraging, if that is the case, then whatever others you have, that you could process yourself afterwards and do some debriefing, letting go of, sharing your experiences. And that as with the Red Cross, we encourage that, and also as Red Cross, look out for each other and encourage each other to take breaks or to take a step back a little bit, making sure that we understand that this is really demanding and challenging work, and so you're going to get tired and you need to take care of yourself, and so we urge and hold that accountability, and I think that's really important.
I'd like to share just briefly. I used to work for the National Guard as an embedded psychologist, and that program ended here in the local area in 2012. When my old supervisor, Yael Eshel, heard about the fire, she called me right away in my office. When you're talking about teamwork, she says, "Oh, I miss those days," because the program ended, and it was really nice to reconnect with an old teammate around working with people who have been traumatized. It was really
That's awesome.
Yeah, teams last.
They sure do. You develop a kind of a bond that is, it just sticks over time. And I think the same thing is true, that people who share their experiences now with others, complete strangers, suddenly develop bonds with these people that can last for very long periods of time. So that's cool. So self-care, that's going to be in your slides. There's no rocket science there. It's just do it. And then there are some more things in these slides about your next steps. What if you want to be more involved in ongoing kind of team that we have been trying to get together for a very long time, then sure, let me know and we'll keep working on it, right, Gail? Then there's crisis response organizations that are things that you can get involved in, or places where you can get more information. So that's all on the website. Training and literature resources, that's there. Your options for volunteer service, paid service. I'm on a number of these different agencies. My phone has been ringing non-stop. Yeah, it's way more need than I could possibly meet. So we can use more of you on those teams. And let's see. This is from Amanda Ripley, the book that I alluded to earlier, who says the unthinkable. We need to get to know our oldest fleeting appearances in our daily lives. It is at the core of who we are. And part 2 of that is, without too much trouble, we can teach our brains to work more quickly, maybe even more wisely, under great stress. We have more control over our fates than we think, but we need to stop underestimating ourselves. And there's a few, this is just a little tiny smattering of resources. There's so much more, but these are just a few that I've picked out that I've found helpful. There's one on here called My Fire Story, which is particularly for children, and there's a lot of really good information or activities in that if you do work with kids. And let's see. Oh, that's it. We're done. Yay! Thank you again for coming. And if you have any other questions, feel free to come up and we'll talk.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And if you want to hear more from Doreen, she is also doing our monthly meeting on November 3rd at RECAMFT. So please come and join us. Have a nice evening.